Hi.
Hey guys,
Welcome.
we're just hanging out in our forward folds today. Can you guess what our topic is going to be?
It's going to be about forward folds.
Variations on forward folds. Like this one, you can do at home. No, just kidding.
It's actually way harder than it looks.
It is. We're going to break down some options to help you with forward folds.
We see a lot of different things happening in classes, but really depending on what you want to work, whether it is more compression at the hips or lengthening through the hamstrings or back at the back body, you can take, like Em said, different variations to accomplish those things. So
in an average yoga class, I don't know how many forward folds we do. A lot. But what we see, especially when people are new to yoga or they just haven't done this motion much, is when they forward fold, sometimes it looks like this and they're trying to touch their toes, which is normal to want to touch your toes. But I'm really probably not going to I'm getting a lot of stretch through the back of my spine, but it can strain the low back when it's all there. So one of the things that we find really helpful is to bend the knees and work on hinging the hips at the hip hinge so your butt kind of goes back to close the space between the ribs and the thighs. So you're kind of breaking it down to a smaller part that you're folding. So starting there and then push the hips up. And my forward fold might be here for a while, but over time I can work on lengthening the back of the hamstring by working on this kind of
almost from a squat position.
Yeah, it's almost, so if you feel stuck, you can, when you come into your forward fold, you can kind of hinge and then push the hips up to get the length in the hamstrings. That's one thing you can do.
Yeah. Also, if you are adamant about touching the floor or getting your hands closer, we've talked about this previously, but blocks underneath the hands are a great way to bring the floor a little bit closer. We don't have blocks out here because it's a nice day, but you know, if you want to kind of keep this compression, but maybe you don't have as much space yet, if you can imagine, blocks underneath the hands can help you still get the same sensation.
Yeah, so if I'm doing my forward fold without the hip hinge and then the teacher says, try bending your knees, look what happens. Like my pelvis tips, my hips tip up. Even if I can't fully straighten my legs yet, I already get more of the ability to actually fold myself in two parts instead of more of a bend across my back body or a curve.
Yeah, and we've said this before too, but you know, if you are rounding through the spine once, twice, fine, but it's the repetitive motion. If you're doing it multiple times a class, multiple times a day or week, you know, it'll start to maybe pull in a spot that you don't necessarily want to. So we really want to break down kind of fundamentals to set you up for success in your practice.
Right.
And then another thing I mentioned too was, you know, if you're starting from a deeper bend and you've got the compression here, eventually you can start to lift the hips, straighten the legs, whatever. And then also one thing to note is notice the difference if you're kind of straining the neck where the spine is, as opposed to if you let the head hang and just, I mean, I like to kind of give a little of this action, nodding the head or shaking the head to release. It feels good on my spine.
Yeah.
My neck. And then feet, what about feet together or feet apart? How do you feel about that?
You know, when I started yoga, I'm pretty sure I did feet together in tons of poses, which is not wrong. But for a lot of people, they'll feel more stable with feet separated, about more in line with where your legs come out of your hip joint. So I tend to be slightly separated, maybe.
Let's face this.
Yeah, maybe not full hip width, but kind of depends on the day, like where I can feel really grounded and push down through my feet and not feel, you know, necessarily tippy. I feel like it feels better when I do fold. I have more grounding down through my feet. So that's a good, it's kind of a little bit of a balance challenge to work feet together. But it does feel like there's a little more pressure in my low back when I keep my feet together. I think because of how my anatomy is.
Yeah, and with feet together, that does put more to your, not a right wrong, but you'll notice a difference. And And again, not a right wrong. So something you can play with. Do I want a little bit more balance challenge? Maybe I'm looking for more of a stretch in my low back versus I want more stability today. I'm working more of the compression, just to find what works for your practice and your body.
Yeah,
which can change.
That's right. That's right. And two, if the forward fold looks more like this, I actually don't feel it a whole lot in my hamstrings when I am more rounded, and somebody else might. But another note about closing, shortening the space you're trying to fold is then that kind of helps me isolate. Now I feel it more in my hamstrings after I've closed that space between my ribs and my thighs. And, it means your forward fold might be more kind of horizontal, like Lauren said, like a squat. And like, you can still relax your head there, right? And it's just, again, it's okay that this isn't straight. So I encourage you to play around with how it feels in your body and say, where do I feel the most sensation when I'm in this kind of partially folded position? Maybe feel like I'm in more of a chair or a squat, but do I actually feel it more in my hamstrings? And can I feel myself folding in half instead of just bending in the back?
Right. And then another thing too is your weight distribution, kind of playing with, if I'm here, but all my weight, you can maybe see my toes kind of lifting up, the weights in my heels. And this feels very different from if I shift the weight forward more. I feel all of this kind of getting a much deeper stretch right away if I rock the weight forward and then the balls of my feet more.
Yeah, and our pelvises, our bodies are all put together differently. And if you, for me, we'll get into this later, I'm sure, my pelvis is slightly tilted forward, which we call an anterior tilt.
Anterior.
Yeah, that's
jargon
right.
alert.
That's right.
From the book I'm reading. It has little jargon alert.
Jargon alert. Lingo.
Yeah. Anyway.
And so when I forward fold, my sits bones automatically are going to tip up. What that can lead to is something called a yoga butt, which is overstretching that tendon right at the back where the hamstring attaches to, jargon alert, your ischial tuberosity, which is that attachment, at the base of your pelvis. So what I've discovered is by breaking down my forward fold, I can control how much stretch goes where. And when I fold, I can squeeze my glutes a little bit after I'm in the fold to keep from feeling too much stretch up high. I'm trying to really get more stretch personally in the belly of my muscle.
The meat of it.
That's right, rather than up at the attachments. And another person might feel it more at the back of their, where their attaches down here, this lower attachment. So our experience, let it give you a reason to be curious about your own experience.
Right, because as you've seen in previous episodes, our proportions are very different. So we experience poses very differently, and we're going to experience them differently from you. So all of this is to just say, here's some things to play with and think about for your own practice. Not you should do what Emily's doing or what Lauren's doing, but rather just some thoughts to take with you.
Where, when you're doing a typical standing forward fold, where, if you weren't being super conscious, you were just kind of being really relaxed about it, where would you feel the most sensation in your body? I'm just curious.
It kind of depends on the day too,
what else you've been doing.
Sure, something we'll talk about what else you've been doing, but also what time of day it is. If I'm practicing at 5:45 in the morning versus 5:30 in the evening, or even 12:15, like an afternoon class, my body feels way different.
So true.
And I might take different feet together versus feet apart for different times of day, depending on, to your point, what else I've been already doing. But
Pilates or sculpt.
Right. I feel, honestly, well, at least today, feel a calf stretch.
So interesting.
And then more of kind of the belly of my hamstrings, which is nice. And I not always, but often get here.
Your upper back? You get a release? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I almost always feel it way up high in my hamstrings.
Yeah.
And it's because of how I'm shaped,
Right.
is it just tends to place most of the weight there. And so it really does help me to kind of break it down and then almost like ease into it. So I'm not just immediately going to my full range and the stretch going up higher than it needs to be. But I almost never get a calf stretch in my forward fold. Like, I don't think my calves tend to take, they don't, for whatever reason, the stretch, how I'm shaped, does not go to my calves, which is really
I
interesting.
wonder if it's because my torso is so long, so I get more weight forward.
Yeah, well, and the way your pelvis is tipped too can make a difference in where this, that stretch is going.
Where kind of the trigger point is almost.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of that, one thing, just to circle back to the yoga, but when you feel that kind of pull, and this would go for any muscle strain, it feels like I want to stretch that. It feels like it's tight. But if you think about what happens in any kind of tear, so if these are your muscle fibers and you strain them, they start pulling apart, right? So if you stretch them more,
while they're already weakened,
right, you're actually kind of working against yourself. So, and again, we're not PTs, we're not doctors, but we've been to enough PT to know this.
And we've had these issues ourselves.
Yeah, that strengthening things like hip bridges to strengthen that instead of stretching it is usually helpful.
Yes, especially if you're feeling it localized in one spot rather than the belly of the muscle. And if it's a kind of a chronic thing where you're feeling this ache and pain after you're done doing yoga or whatever you're doing, or if you sit on it, sometimes that tendon gets really irritated, and what you don't want to do is pull on it. Right. So we can save you that trouble.
Yeah. But if you have issues, go see We Like 901 PT.
Yes, huge
if you're
fan of 901 PT.
But yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, good call. And we can do another episode hitting on some of the kind of repetitive use issues that yogis tend to run into and what we've found that helps. Yeah. Great. Happy forward folding.
Yeah. And if you have questions about it, let us know. Drop them in the comments. Send us a DM. If there's anything else you guys want to learn about, let us know. Signature move.
Signature move. I can't think of anything better.